Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our GP webinar series. We're so fortunate to have a great presenter with us today, Mark Polino, Principal Consultant here at IBIS and a Microsoft MVP. So Mark, I'll let you take it away, and thanks again for jumping on.
Well, good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Mark Polino. We're going to see if we can spend a few minutes here figuring out some best practices around sales order processing in Dynamics GP. We will peel back to some questions at the end, but just to make sure you don't forget your question, up at the top there's a Q&A setting. If you'll just hit that and type in your questions throughout the session, that way we'll be able to catch them all and we can circle back and make sure we cover all the material and answer questions at the end. So let's go ahead and get rolling here. For our webinar series, we'd love for you to share. We want folks who can't make the webinar to still get the benefit of what's going on. Feel free to tweet, blog, update Facebook with things you're learning in here. It's also useful to help then remember stuff you learned in the session when this is over, because you know as soon as this is over, you're going to go to lunch or you're going to get interrupted. And by making a little record of something that you learned, it reminds you to go back and double check it. The official tag is #IBIS. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at some best practice items for sales order processing. We're going to start by looking at some best practices around the setups, maybe some features that people miss that can really make a difference in how sales order processing works to really make it work right inside of your organization. And then we'll move to best practices around transaction processing, document delivery, and then some reporting things that are available as well. So this will be mostly Dynamics GP. We'll pop into PowerPoint just enough for you to get what the items are, and then it'll be really showing you how and where these things work. So first, can really simplify your work with sales order processing by setting the default type. We're going to start with some of the easy stuff. For an individual user, under User Preferences, there is a default sales document type. So in your organization, if you don't use quotes or you always start with an order, you can set the default document type. And what that does is that reduces the number of keystrokes that a user has to perform when they start to do a transaction. So just by changing this to order or to invoice, that's the default that comes up, saves everybody a keystroke. On a related note, we can also set all kinds of default dates around sales order processing, which, again, reduces the amount of data entry that has to go on when you're working with sales order transactions. So let's pop over to sales transactions here. We're going to scroll down to sales order processing. And so here's one. Here's the document date. This controls the data entry around the document date. And you've got two choices. You can either use the previous document date or you can use the user date. So, for example, if normally I get a pile of entries that I need to put into Dynamics GP, and maybe I get a pile from yesterday, well, then previous document date makes sense because I would start with the first transaction, put in yesterday's day, do that transaction, and when I get to the next transaction, GP will default to that same date that I used on the previous transaction. So I can do a whole pile for the same date without having to worry about changing it. If, however, I'm generally working with brand new orders that are coming in today that I want to put in with today's date, then the right setting for this is to go ahead and set it to user date. So it really depends a lot on your organization. But we know that getting dates right is really important just throughout the system, making sure that everything lands where it's supposed to land. So getting control of this so that it's harder for people to make mistakes is an important piece around this. Another piece is the requested ship date. I find lots of people who never change this. The reality is most of you know that when a customer requests something, it is probably not going to ship today. Depends on your business, maybe it does. But a lot of businesses, just the nature of what they do, it will not ship today. So setting this to the document date really doesn't do anything for you from an analysis standpoint, because if you look at when you actually shipped versus when you were supposed to ship, you're always behind. That really is not what's going on. So we can go ahead and set this to days after the document date, and if our standard is we always ship everything within 3 days, then at least I know that the requested ship date, the default requested ship date, is our standard. I can still change it on transaction, but we've at least set the standard so that we're not automatically behind. Whoops. All right, so another issue is voiding or deleting transactions. When you're working in Dynamics GP with a sales order transaction, you have the option to allow transactions to be voided or allow them to be deleted. And an awful lot of folks think of this as one or the other. Either I allow them to be deleted or I allow them to be voided, and that's not the way it works at all. You have lots of choices. There are really good reasons around both, so it does depend on your business. The reasoning is, let me get a transaction up here so that we can talk intelligently. Let's say that I have an invoice. Let's say that I have an invoice here. If I have created this invoice and I've printed it and I've sent it out, I really don't want people to be able to delete it from a control standpoint. I don't want folks to be able to send out an invoice, delete it out of my system, and then when the customer makes payment, they put that payment in their pocket because there's no record of it in the system, and essentially they're stealing from us. So that's a good reason to turn off delete, and that's why most people want to remove the ability to delete. You can still void, so that if I make a mistake, I simply void it. There's a record of the mistake in the system, but I'm not sending out documents without records. However, if you're doing integrations, and we'll dig deeper into integrations in a little bit. If you're doing integrations, maybe I integrate a big batch of transactions and I realize, hey, we goofed. We messed something up. This is the first time we're integrating them, or there was a problem with the source data. We need to delete all of these transactions. In particular, if you're integrating the document number, if you're integrating the invoice number from another system, if you void those documents, then that document number is used up and you won't be able to reintegrate that data with the same document number. So in those cases, you need to be able to, allow those items to be deleted. So there's some nice middle ground here, and there are options beyond just either I void or I delete. So let's look at those really fast. The void or delete selection is really by document. So I'm going to go look at Invoices. And this is actually by document type. So you see I have lots of invoice types here. For the standard type, maybe I want to be, maybe I don't want, for a standard invoice that somebody keys, I don't want them to be able to delete it. Or for an integrated invoice, maybe this is some type of integrated invoice here, I do want to be able to delete it. So I can separate my invoice types and actually control whether I want to delete documents based on the invoice type. Now, so that's one way to control. I have a single invoice type that I use for integration and different invoice types that I use for data entry. And so that's one way to control the power of delete versus not allowing delete. And then if I'm really controlling, I expect to upload $10,000 worth of invoices. Yes, my batch when I post it is $10,000 worth of invoices. You've got another control point to prevent people from generating invoices and sending them off without a system record. Well, related to that, there's something else. We all seem to forget that this password column exists. I can create a password in order to delete a document. So now when I go to delete a document, it's allowed, but it's only allowed if you have the password. So as long as you properly control the password, you can actually have the option to delete documents or not delete them, but you've got an additional control on that. It's not an all or nothing. So some of these depend on specifically how your organization is going to use it, but the fact that you've got greater control than you might realize is really important. In addition, we've got a ton of user-defined fields. These are also really useful for integration. They're also useful for just folks who are keying. because in these we can control an awful lot of information. So for example, I can actually create a list here. These are the user-defined fields in the setup. These are for data entry on any of the sales order transaction forms. We've created a document origin here, which means folks are going to have to pick something from this list. They're not going to be able to key freeform. So if I wanted to put something else, maybe we're running a Twitter campaign allowing people to do orders online or submit items through Twitter in order for purchase. We can say OK. And then when they actually go to pick from a document, they're going to have these choices. We have two date fields. So if the data was created in another system that you're integrating through to Dynamics GP is needed, you've got a great place to be able to put it. And then we've got a bunch of freeform fields as well. We've got some user-defined items around prospect maintenance, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, and some additional user-defined items around customers and item maintenance that can roll back into sales order processing as well. So don't forget about those. They're a great way to be able to customize stuff that you stick in sales order transactions. So an important best practice is to do credit holds. It's no secret that the economy has been rough for the last several years. It appears to be slowly trying to climb its way out, but that doesn't mean that there are still a lot of people whose companies may not make it out of this recession. And so managing your credit is really important. Inside of sales order processing, we can have credit holds, and it's really easy to set up. So when I'm setting up a document type, maybe I'm setting up an order at this point in time. For a particular type of order, we'll just pick a standard order for now, I can say that I want to put a credit limit hold on it. This works with other process holds, which we'll look at in just a minute, but credit limits would be one type of process hold. So I can come here and say that we have a credit limit hold. I drill back on here and say we actually have a hold for transferring documents and for posting documents. And then in receivable setup, you simply need to make sure that there's not a password here for exceeding the credit limit. And what that will do is if a transaction gets processed, let's go back to our rules here. If someone tries to transfer a document, it will go out and do a check for a credit hold. It will do a check against the credit limit for that particular customer. And if this will exceed their credit limit, it will put them on hold. And in this case, we're doing the check at the time of transferring, and we're doing the check at the time of posting. And so this leads us to broader options around holds, which are process holds. Now, process holds we can put into, we can actually define, and we can use around our sales order processing. Save that off for just a second. And process holds look like this. So we can define them right here. We create a particular process hold that we want to apply. So some examples are pretty straightforward here. Maybe sales manager approval. So before we transfer a document, we need to have somebody go and approve it. Or before we print a document, we need to have a quality assurance check done on it. Before we fulfill a document, we need to do a quality assurance check. So once we've created these process holds, what we can do is, with hold processing, we can actually assign a number of these holds. So in other words, I start a transaction as a quote. After it passes from a quote to an order, maybe it needs a sales manager approval. When it passes from an order, it needs credit check approval, those types of things. We build them all in, we can assign the process holds, and what will happen is those documents will go on hold as they move through the process of quote, order, invoice, each of those steps of fulfilling, printing, whatever you've actually assigned to them. And you can choose whether or not you want a password to remove the hold or not, or you can simply use security to allow certain people to remove holds. This also works really well with integrations, Because what happens is there are cases where companies want to integrate a bunch of data and go ahead and put it all on hold so that someone can go review the integration, make sure that everything worked as expected before it gets picked up and processed onto the next step. That gives folks the opportunity to review it without being worried that someone else in the process is going to pick it up and post that batch. All right, so let's look at some stuff around transaction processing. Too many folks still don't use quotes inside of Dynamics GP. The nice thing about quotes is that you don't really have to have a customer yet. So for a quote, I can actually say, I can actually create a prospect. This is someone who is not a customer yet. I put in my prospect information, and when they become a customer, I have an option to transfer my prospect information and to turn it into a customer at that point in time. So this keeps the customer records from being polluted, but it still lets me send quotes out to prospects. You know, in this day and age, everybody's still pretty tight with their money, so being able to send out a quote can really be important, but not having to worry about cleaning those things out at year end because you set them up as a customer is fantastic. Another important piece is drop shipping, and there's a couple things around here. So if I'm working inside of an invoice in Dynamics GP, get rid of our quote there. Oops. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put this in a batch for us. So folks who do drop shipping, there are a couple of different options, and just to show you the power of some of these pieces here, the typical thing you would do is you'd go up and you'd select your item, and you say, check the D for drop ship box, and you say, yes, I want to drop ship this item. And that works great until you realize you've got 50 of these things to key in, and every one means an extra keystroke for you. So a way to tackle that is to come back up to options here and check the dropship item selection there. Notice once I pick it, it's got a checkbox next to it. Now, every line item I put in, oops, I got a couple of manufacturing things going on here. So now every line item I put in will automatically get the dropship box checked. And the cool thing is, if I decide, oh, you know what, we actually don't want to drop ship that one item, I can uncheck this box as well. So the nice thing about it is you really have control over the drop shipping process. You can drop ship individual items in a sales order document. You can drop ship, you can set it up that you want to default all of these items to drop ship. You can make exceptions after you defaulted all of the items to drop ship. So if you're still sitting and checking the box with every one, you've got lots of options around that. Being able to combine these things together and drop ship different ones really works well. I know for just as a simple example, the other day I bought 3 things from Amazon, and they were able to ship me 2 out of their warehouse and had to have 1 drop shipped from someplace else. Well, you can do all of that inside of Dynamics GP as well, and you can do it all on one invoice as well. How about dates? Dates are the things that will absolutely drive you nuts inside of Dynamics GP because they are really, really critical from a reporting and analysis standpoint, but yet nobody ever wants to key the dates right. So some things you need to understand about dates in Dynamics GP. Up here in the corner, there's a set of dates. We can look at the quote date, the quote expiration date, the order date, back order. All of these get filled in if we've gone all the way through the process, as well as our requested ship date. This is where we looked earlier for our extra 3 days. We said our standard was 3 days. We wanted to add 3 days to it. That's where the requested ship date goes in. And so the date fulfilled in the actual ship date get taken care of through the process, through the fulfillment and shipping process. So this gives you data that you can compare down the road to your requested date. gives you performance data. You can go figure those kinds of things out. But if you're not putting in the right requested ship date, then you're not going to be able to get the right data out. In addition, so that's sort of the global default, but in addition, we can control that on a line item level as well. So here I'm looking at a particular line. I see the requested ship date for the line, and I see the date shipped for the line. So I can adjust either one of these to be appropriate. And in addition, I can draw all the way back for a particular line as well. And I've got the requested ship date, the date fulfilled, the actual ship date. I get an extra date in there, the fulfilled date, to be able to adjust here. The toughest part about this is always getting folks to key in the right dates. Dates seem to be one of those things that we just skip by without actually spending a whole lot of time with. And if you can get your folks to spend a little time with the dates inside of Dynamics GP, you can get some absolutely incredible metrics out of it in terms of performance and how you're doing in terms of responding to your customers. Comments are another really cool piece. Most folks have figured out that there's a comment box here. So let me give you a couple of things. This comment ID is global. It appears in the footer, and it applies to the entire item, invoice, order, etc., the entire document. The idea behind comment IDs is that I can create a global comment ID, like maybe, we've moved, and then in my comment, I actually can put, new address, something like note new address, so that it goes on all of the documents, everybody sees it, it's a consistent thing, we want to appear very regularly, that kind of thing. But what happens is folks like to use some of these things for ad hoc comments rather than consistent comments, so you end up with a ton of comment IDs. So the way to work around that is you click the blue, instead of putting a comment ID in here, is you click the blue arrow and put a comment in. Don't forget our special pricing ends Friday. I don't know, something like that. So this is an ad hoc comment that's only being used maybe one time. You'll see a little note appear over here that yes, there is a comment. This appears in the exact same place as the comment with a comment ID would be, so you don't have to change any of your forms or do anything different from that standpoint. But again, this is a global comment that appears at the bottom. Lots of folks want to make comments both with IDs and ad hocs at the item level. And the way you do that is to pick a particular item. This note actually goes back to the item master. So what you want to do is hit the blue arrow to expand it, and you've got a comment ID down here, as well as the blue arrow to put in ad hoc comments. So for this particular item, it's a green phone. We said out of green, shipped blue. So in that case, that is a single line comment that will appear underneath that line on all of the base items in Dynamics GP. If you've modified your invoice or your order, it'll appear in the same place that you've moved those individual comment lines to. So best practice here is really, especially for line item comments, unless you're doing the same thing over and over again, don't pollute this by building a bunch of comment IDs. Use the ad hoc piece here. Be able to let people be able to comment, to communicate with customers via their invoices and orders without having to build up a bunch of stuff here. Well, let's save that off. Also, don't forget that Dynamics GP supports recurring orders. It does not support recurring invoices, but we'll look at some options around that. It does support recurring quotes, orders, and back orders. The key is in setup for a particular order type. What was the spec order. Okay, so the key is to check the Allow Repeating Documents box. And then when I go in to do an order in GP, and I pick the spec one, and you see we can control this by type, so I can allow some types of orders to repeat and not others. You get my information in here. Okay. It is hiding on the document number expansion window here by the blue arrow. And I say that I want this order to be repeating. The number of times I want it to repeat, 0 is forever. How often? Weekly. And then the batch that I want to put it in when it repeats. So we can have repeating orders. You simply create repeating orders and then you transfer them to an invoice. You end up with a batch of repeating orders. You transfer the whole batch to an invoice. And that's a way of getting repeating invoices. Oops. Now, I'd like to offer you another way around not having repeating invoices as well. So what about copying invoices? So let's say, for example, maybe you don't have a pile of them, but you have a few invoices that you would like to be able to reuse, but not necessarily on a regular basis. Well, one way you can do that is you can come and create your invoice. I think it is 2263. Yep. So I've created an invoice, 2263, and I'm going to put it on hold. So I have put this whole invoice on hold so that folks are not going to be able to do anything with it. This is going to be my basis for an invoice that I want to reuse maybe periodically. Maybe every so often when the customer calls, this is a pretty complicated order and we'd like to set it up once and not have to mess with it. So I've created it and I've put it on hold. And then what I can do is I can simply come here and say that I want to, I want to copy it. And the way we do that is, save that off. I come and I create a new invoice. I pick my customer. And I get this far. And then I say that I want to copy. So I'm targeting my brand new invoice that I'm creating. And I want to get it from the invoice that I have on hold. Click copy. I can preview it if I want to see what's going to come in there. And it's going to bring that same data onto this invoice. And you'll notice there's no hold applied to this invoice. So that gives me an opportunity to set up like a template style invoice for certain customers, leave it on hold so it's never going to post, and be able to pick it up and move it over, make a copy of it when I do need it. Go ahead and, can't delete. See, I've controlled these all so that I can't delete them. All right, what else have we got here? Transfers, just to make sure that everybody understands this, when you are transferring items from, say, an order to an invoice, there are a couple of different ways to do it. And I don't have any standard orders. There we go, that'll work. So we can do it in an action and transfer an individual invoice. So action, transfer. In this case, I've got an invoice on creating back orders. In addition, we can transfer an entire batch. So I've got a batch here. I can do transfer, and I get choices of what I want to transfer for an entire batch. And then finally, there's also a transfer function. So I can create a destination batch, and I can transfer multiple orders to an invoice or back orders to an invoice based on some criteria that I've created. So maybe there are a number of orders or back orders that I'm ready to transfer to an invoice, but I'm not ready to transfer the entire batch. Rather than move them around within their batches manually, I can use this window to select orders that I want to transfer, and it will move them into a batch and do the transfer for you. So really, we've got 3 ways to be able to transfer items around from quote to order, order to invoice, invoice to back order, and back to invoice again. We've talked some about integrations, so I just want to touch on that as we're integrating transactions, keeping in mind the delete versus void is really important, especially if you're bringing in item numbers from a source transaction. Because if you're bringing in, invoice numbers from a source transaction, because if I bring in invoice 1234 and then void it in GP, I'm not going to be able to bring in invoice 1234 again. In addition, all of those user-defined fields that we looked at are really important around integration. They allow you to help bring in any additional information from the source to help clarify both where it came from and what this transaction is for. Okay, so how about some document delivery stuff? There are some things in, if you're doing an individual transaction inside of GP, maybe I'm, see here. I'm working with this particular transaction and I want to print it. Well, I can come up here and do that, and I can check the invoices box, and I can click the print button, and I can send it to the screen and click OK. I'm using Word forms here, so this may take a second the first time it loads because it's got to load Word. Oh, there we go. So there's my invoice in a Word form on the screen. The Word forms are new in GP 2010. If you're using an older version, you would see the typical report writer form. However, that's an awful lot of boxes to check. Well, there's a faster way. Under Options, Quick Print, click that, and hey, look, it just did all of that for me. I didn't have to go check all those boxes, and now in just a second or two, I'm looking at my invoice. Quick Print gets set up here under Options. We can have some control over whether we want to send this to the printer or the screen. We can control packing slips, picking tickets, and then the regular set of documents differently. And related to that, actually Control Q is the Quick Print key. So I don't even have to touch any menus. I can push 2 buttons and I'm going to get the exact same result. So there's still too many folks who are longtime users of sales order processing that aren't using Quick Print to really speed up their process. Reprint, I suspect that most of you are aware of this, but I still bump into it now and then. So if you're reprinting something in particular from a batch, and this will become more important as we look at the emailing stuff going on here, there's a reprint previously printed button here. So I want to reprint my invoice. If I don't check this button, nothing happens. It sort of behaves like something is happening, but nothing actually comes out. So when I check the button, you see I actually get my reprint going on here. If I do that same thing, though, and don't check the button, I don't get any magical warning. It's just nothing happens. So it's a little frustrating to folks. This will be important because this is related to email delivery as well. You'll definitely have folks who say, I need another copy of the invoice, I need it emailed to me. And so you'll have folks who maybe aren't used to doing reprinting who are going in to do that. So it's important to understand how that works from a sales order processing standpoint. Email, Dynamics GP 2010 introduced the ability to email directly out of GP in a, you can use Word, the Word 2007 or higher, the DocX format, PDF, XPS, which is sort of Microsoft's answer to PDF, or HTML. It's really simple to use. It's a great way to deliver invoices. So I'm going to pull this thing up. I've got a couple of different ways. You'll notice at my customer In the bill to address, I've actually set their email. I've set it to me. And then in the setup for that customer, there's a new email tab, and I've said I want everything to go as PDF, and I want the documents to be attached rather than embedding the information in the message body. So if I want to send this to someone, for a single one, I can simply do here, Invoices, send document and email, click print, and you'll notice it generates the email. I did one of these earlier just to simplify it. It looks like this. See, I've got a pile of them from testing. These messages are all configurable. Hello, thank you for your business. And when I pull this up, I get a nice, pretty, Word-based invoice in PDF format. So especially if you're using Dynamics GP 2010, if you're looking to move to GP 2010, it's a fantastic feature to be able to send this thing out. There's no reason for folks not to be using it. In addition, it requires a third-party application. There are a number of them out there that support EDI with Dynamics GP, but you can also deliver sales order transactions via EDI. We've recently done some project work with a customer who needs to deliver healthcare invoices via EDI, so there's some very specific requirements around the types of data and information that they need to deliver. That can absolutely be done. The typical Walmart stuff can absolutely be done. So if you have requirements for EDI, rest assured that there are third-party add-ons for GP that can help you work through that. So how about some reporting and analysis stuff? So this is from me to you. I wrote some code a while back. If you're familiar with Amazon.com, when you go and you buy something on Amazon, it says customers who bought this item also bought these other items, or customers who looked at this item ended up buying this item, those kinds of things. So this is similar code. It is SQL Server code. It is available for free. All you got to do is go to the link and download it. And what this does is it'll show you for customers who bought product X, and you put in whatever you want product X to be, they also bought all of these other products on the same order a certain percentage of the time. So customers who bought Toyota Camrys also bought extended warranties 20% of the time, that kind of thing. It's available as a view, so you can actually roll it really easily into Smart List Builder. I'll just show it to you right here. So I've got a Smart List around sales. I've called it related items. And what I do is I come in here to search and I say I'm looking for item number 5-fee. That's the item number that we're interested in. And so what I do is I get a list that says, hey, for all the people who bought 5-fee, 56% of them also paid for travel labor at the as well. 32% of them bought a SCSI cable. So this gives you the opportunity to analyze who's buying related items and then reposition those related items, whether it's on your website, whether it's suggestive selling from your salespeople. Maybe one of two things are happening. Either you don't realize that people are associating two products together, so now you've got an opportunity for additional sales, or maybe folks should be associating two items together. When they buy the printer, they should also buy the printer cable to go with it, and you're not doing a great job of associating those items. You can go fix that. So as I said, this is free code to help you guys analyze sales stuff coming out of sales order processing. And then in addition, we've got some free SQL code available to you to analyze customers who haven't bought yet. Well, if they haven't bought yet, how are they a customer? That's not quite what this code does. What it does is it says, for a particular item, show me all of my customers who haven't bought this item. And now suddenly, as we're trying to get more revenue out of our existing customers in this recession, I've got a list of customers and an item to go hit those customers for that item. Even if that's not a final list, even if I need to do additional qualifying for what services they own or whether they're an appropriate fit for that item, it's a great place to start saying, hey, we need to move more telephones. Let's see all the customers that we already have. They're already our customers, but they haven't bought telephones for us. And then we can go build a campaign around that for those customers. Finally, the analysis cube stuff inside of Dynamics GP is absolutely phenomenal. We can put in analysis cubes very, very quickly and really start delivering value. The ability to slice and dice the sales order processing data left and right is just an absolutely phenomenal thing to see. So if you're not using analysis cubes, particularly if you want to analyze your sales data, it is a great solution, and it is an easy and fast solution. It's very familiar. You're just using Excel. All of the data in GP then gets crunched into a cube, and you use Excel to draw that data out. So I'm going to pop over to Q&A here, and let's see. Okay, so credit memos, returns. Let's pop back to that for just a second. So inside of Dynamics GP, there are two items, a credit memo and a return. A credit memo you would really want to use with a receivables transaction that didn't come through sales order processing, or some other type of adjustment to the receivable where you don't want to fiddle with line items and returning those things. If you need to make an adjustment on a sales order, maybe they've returned the goods on a sales transaction entry, there is a return transaction. That allows you to, if you have goods that come into inventory, you can bring those items back into inventory. The key being that a return transaction really applies to line items, and a credit memo really only applies on the receivable side. A credit memo will not affect line items or inventory or any of those other kinds of things. For credit memos, you actually apply them to a receivable, and for returns, you're simply you're doing an offset against that customer. Essentially, you're doing almost a negative invoice against that particular customer. All right, so let's go wrap these pieces up here. Oops. So just a couple of other things to help you get. You're obviously on this webinar because you're looking for support, you're looking for some other stuff. I am an IBIS employee, but I have some other side projects around Dynamics GP just because I really love the work that I do and what I work with. One of them is mygpsearch.com. I've taken all of the GP-related websites that I can find and rolled them into a custom search engine. It is regularly getting updated. The data is always fresh. So if you're stuck with something, that's a great place to go and be able to find information. Even yesterday, we had an error pop up at a client I was working with. I put the error into mygpsearch.com. It took me to a blog post that another prominent blogger had created that had the exact same issue. They specified the Microsoft knowledge base to go get more information and showed what the fix was. It was a whole lot faster than digging through PartnerSource to find that same knowledge base. It took about 30 seconds. In addition, I'm the author of the Microsoft Dynamics GP 2010 Cookbook. It is stuffed full of tips to help you work with Dynamics GP to be able to get more out of Dynamics GP. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or from the publisher. The publisher actually has an ebook version. Amazon and Barnes & Noble have the big paperback version. Finally, a couple of great places for support. Our Dynamics Care webinar, a couple of these items that actually are in the best practices presentation, Amy Walsh has blogged about over the last several weeks. So you actually find stuff going on continuously there, new items, ways to get better with Dynamics GP. And then dynamicaccounting.net is my personal site where I do lots of blogging in addition to Dynamics Care about Dynamics GP, specific topics, help, fixes, all of those kinds of things. So let me circle back. I think we have one more question. Is there a way to report on quantity in FRX? There is generally not, because FRX only reports at the general ledger level. So in order to do that, you would have to put quantity in a unit account. If you're simply trying to do something for financial statements, that might be an option, where you just plug the quantity of a particular item into a unit account. But in terms of getting data out of sales order processing in a regular process for FRX, that is not an option for FRX. So with that, thank you very much for coming. We really enjoy doing these things, and we hope that you get something out of it. You guys have a great day.